They thought she was broken. They thought she was penniless. In the sterile, cold air of the Superior Court of Manhattan, Julian Thorne stood laughing, flanked by his high-priced lawyers, mocking the woman who had built him from nothing. He called her a leech. He called her a failure. He was minutes away from signing the divorce papers that would leave her homeless while he kept the empire she helped create. But Julian made one fatal mistake. He didn't check the mail that morning, because while he was busy mocking her, Elena wasn't just becoming his ex-wife. She was becoming his boss, and the document in her trembling hand wasn't a plea for mercy. It was an eviction notice. The mahogany doors of courtroom 3B swung open with a heavy, final thud, sealing the fate of everyone inside. The air smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne, specifically Santal 33, the scent Julian had started wearing the moment his tech startup, Thorne Dynamics, hit its first $10 million in revenue. Elena sat alone at the defendant's table. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, fingers interlaced so tightly that the knuckles had turned a translucent white. She wore a simple charcoal dress, one she had bought at a discount outlet 3 years ago. It was clean, pressed, but unmistakably worn. Across the aisle, the contrast was sickeningly sharp. Julian Thorne looked like he had just stepped out of a GQ spread. His navy bespoke suit, tailored on Savile Row, fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He was leaning back in his chair, whispering something to his lead counsel, Marcus Sterling, a man known in New York legal circles as the Butcher for how he handled divorce settlements. Julian let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound that echoed off the high ceilings and struck Elena right in the chest. Beside Julian sat Chloe, his personal assistant turned fiancée. She was 22, glowing with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having faced a real hardship. She was scrolling through her phone, likely picking out curtains for the penthouse Elena had spent 5 years renovating. "Order," Judge Harrison said, his voice weary. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the pile of documents. "We are here to finalize the dissolution of marriage between Julian Thorne and Eleanor Vance. Mr. Sterling, you have the floor regarding the division of assets." Sterling stood up, smoothing his silk tie. He didn't look at Eleanor. To him, she was just an obstacle to be removed, a smudge on a balance sheet. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice smooth as oil, "my client, Mr. Thorne, has been exceedingly generous. Despite Ms. Vance's lack of contribution to Thorne Dynamics during its critical growth period, we have offered a lump sum settlement of $50,000. Given that the prenuptial agreement, which Ms. Vance signed voluntarily, clearly states that any assets acquired during the marriage remain the sole property of the earner, we believe this is more than fair. Frankly, it is charity." Elena felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Lack of contribution? She remembered the nights she stayed up until 4 a.m., coding the back end of Julian's first app, because he was too drunk to focus. She remembered selling her grandmother's jewelry, the vintage sapphire ring that was the only heirloom she had, to pay the server costs in 2019 when investors turned their backs on him. She remembered holding him while he cried on the bathroom floor, paralyzed by anxiety, telling him he was a genius, that he could do it. "Charity?" Elena spoke up, her voice cracked, dry from lack of water and sleep. "Ms. Vance, speak only when addressed," the judge warned gently, though his eyes held a flicker of pity. Julian turned to look at her then. His eyes, once warm and full of promises, were now cold, hard flint. "Elena, don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, loud enough for the court reporter to type it down. "You know the reality. You were a waitress when I met you. You're leaving as a waitress. The 50 grand is to help you get back on your feet. Take it. Stop embarrassing yourself." "I'm not the one who should be embarrassed, Julian," Elena whispered, though the fight was draining out of her. "Oh, please," Chloe chimed in, not bothering to lower her voice. "Julian, just sign the papers. I have a fitting at Vera Wong at 2. Julian patted Chloe's hand affectionately, then turned his sneer back to Elena. "You hear that, Elena? Life moves on. Thorn Dynamics is about to go public. We're looking at an evaluation of $800 million, and you— Well, I heard the diner on 5th Street is hiring. Maybe you can go back to doing what you're actually good at." The courtroom went silent. Even Mr. Sterling looked slightly uncomfortable at the brazen cruelty. "Mr. Thorne, refrain from personal insults," Judge Harrison said, tapping his gavel once. "Apologies, Your Honor," Julian said, offering a charming, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just frustrated. This woman has been dragging her feet for months, hoping for a payday she didn't earn. She's a gold digger who forgot to bring a shovel." Eleanor looked down at the scarred wooden table. Gold digger. The irony was a physical pain. When they met, Julian was $40,000 in debt. She had paid his rent for 2 years. She had fed him. She had clothed him. "I have the settlement papers here," Sterling said, sliding a thick document across the aisle toward Eleanor. "Sign here, here, and here. Once signed, you vacate the Tribeca apartment within 24 hours. The locks will be changed at noon tomorrow." Elena reached for the pen. Her hand trembled. She looked at Julian one last time, searching for a trace of the man she had loved. The man who had sworn his life to her under an oak tree in Central Park. He wasn't there. There was only a CEO who believed his own press releases. "Just sign it, Ellie," Julian taunted, using the nickname only he used to use. "Do it for old time's sake, before I change my mind and reduce the offer to 0. Elena, the tip of the pen, touched the paper. She was beaten. She had no lawyer. She couldn't afford one against Sterling. She had no evidence of her work on the company. Julian had scrubbed her name from the records months ago. Just as she was about to sign away her life, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. The noise was so loud, so sudden, that the bailiff reached for his belt. 3 men in dark suits walked in. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like government officials, or perhaps something higher. Leading them was a tall, silver-haired man, carrying a briefcase, handcuffed to his wrist. "Stop the proceedings," the silver-haired man announced, his voice booming with authority. "This is a closed hearing," Judge Harrison barked. "Who are you?" The man walked straight past the bar, ignoring the bailiff, ignoring Julian's outraged expression. He stopped directly in front of Elena's table. He placed the briefcase on the table and unlocked the cuff with a small silver key. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor," the man said, his accent clipped and British. "I am Alistair Graham, Senior Executor for the Vanguard Trust in London. I have been trying to reach Ms. Elena Vance for 3 days. It appears her mail was intercepted." He shot a sharp look at Julian. Julian frowned. He had indeed instructed the doorman to trash any mail addressed to Eleanor for the past week. "What is this nonsense?" Julian stood up. "Get him out of here. We are finalizing a divorce." "Mr. Thorne, sit down," the judge ordered. He looked at Alistair. "What is the meaning of this? What does the Vanguard Trust have to do with this divorce?" Alistair ignored Julian and looked at Elena. His expression softened. "Ms. Vance, I am sorry we are late, but legally you cannot sign that settlement document." "Why not?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "Because," Alistair said, opening the briefcase and pulling out a document bound in blue velvet. That document declares you have assets of 0. That is factually incorrect. As of 9:00 a.m. this morning, London time, following the passing of your estranged great-uncle, Lord Archibald Vance of Blackwood, you are the sole beneficiary of the Vance estate. The room went deadly silent. Julian scoffed. Her uncle? She doesn't have an uncle. She's an orphan. She comes from nothing. Alistair turned to Julian, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. She comes from the Vance bloodline, Mr. Thorne, the silent partners of the European banking system. And as for nothing, Alistair turned back to Elena. Ms. Vance, the estate includes the Blackwood Manor in Surrey, a real estate portfolio in Manhattan, and liquid assets totaling £1.2 billion, roughly $1.5 billion US. Chloe dropped her phone. The sound of it hitting the floor was the only noise in the room. Julian's face went pale. That's impossible. It is verified, Alistair said. However, there is a complication regarding this proceeding. He pointed to the divorce papers. What complication? Julian asked, his greed suddenly warring with his confusion. If she has money, then... Well, we're still married. That's marital assets. Julian's lawyer, Sterling, practically salivated. Your Honor, if this is true, my client is entitled to an equitable distribution of these new assets as the marriage is not yet dissolved. Julian's shock turned into a predatory grin. That's right. We haven't signed yet, Eleanor. Half of that is mine. Elena stared at Alistair. She felt like the floor was tilting. Billionaire? Her. Alistair looked at Julian, then back to Elena. Actually, that is where the twist lies. The inheritance comes with a specific clause. The fidelity clause. The funds are only released to the beneficiary if they are divorced from any spouse who has committed infidelity. Alistair pulled out a second folder. And we have the photos, Mr. Thorne, from Miami, last year, long before you filed for divorce. The silence that followed Alistair's declaration was heavier than the one before, but it had a different quality. Before, it was the silence of a victim being crushed. Now, it was the silence of a predator realizing he had walked into a cage. Julian's face went from pale to a blotchy, angry red. This is absurd. Who are you? You can't just barge in here with fake British accents and fairy tales about billions of dollars. Mr. Sterling, Judge Harrison said, his voice sharp. Control your client. Sterling was frantically whispering to Julian, trying to pull him back into his chair. But Julian shook him off. The mention of the fidelity clause had struck a nerve, specifically, the nerve connected to his wallet. Infidelity? Julian spat. I never... Save it, Julian. Elena spoke. Her voice was stronger now. The shock was fading, replaced by a slow-burning realization. She looked at the man named Alistair. Is this real? Alistair bowed his head slightly. As real as the ground beneath your feet, Miss Vance. Or should I say, Lady Blackwood. The title comes with the estate. Lady Blackwood. It sounded ridiculous. And yet, looking at the heavy bond paper Alistair had placed in front of her, seeing the official seals of the High Court of Justice in London, she knew. Can I see the photos? Eleanor asked. Alistair slid a thick manila envelope across the table. Elena opened it. Her hands were steady now. Inside were high-resolution photographs. Julian and Chloe on a yacht in Miami. Julian and Chloe entering a hotel room in Paris. The dates stamped on the photos were from 18 months ago. She looked up at Julian. You told me you were in Paris for an investor conference. You said you couldn't call me because the signal was bad? Julian looked at the photos from across the aisle. He didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed that he'd been caught. So what? It was a physical thing, Elena. It didn't mean anything. But you kept a billion-dollar secret from me. That's fraud. She didn't know, you idiot, Alistair said, breaking his formal demeanor for a split second. Lord Vance was estranged from the family. He tracked her down only recently. He died 3 days ago. Elena knew nothing. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket, trying to regain control. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We request a recess to verify these claims. Furthermore, regarding this fidelity clause, such clauses are often contestable in U.S. courts. If Mr. Thorne is still legally married to Ms. Vance, he has rights. The judge rubbed his temples. Mr. Sterling is correct that we need to verify the documents. However, if the inheritance is separate property acquired by bequest, it is usually not subject to equitable distribution anyway, regardless of when it was received. But the appreciation of it, Sterling argued, or if she commingles it, we need to freeze all assets immediately. Elena looked at Julian. He was staring at her with a look of pure, unadulterated greed. The disgust on his face from 10 minutes ago was gone. Now, he was looking at her like she was a winning lottery ticket he had almost thrown in the trash. Ellie, Julian said, his voice dropping to that soft, manipulative register he used when he wanted something. Baby, look, let's take a breath. We've had a rough year. But 18 months ago, we were happy then. Maybe we rushed this divorce. Maybe we should talk, without the lawyers. Chloe whipped her head around, her jaw dropping. Julian, what are you saying? Shut up, Chloe, Julian hissed, not looking away from Eleanor. Eleanor, think about it. We built a life together. You helped me with Thorne Dynamics. We were a team. If you have this legacy, think of what we could do. We could be the biggest power couple in New York. You don't want to handle all that money alone. You need someone who understands finance, someone you trust. Elena stared at him. It was mesmerizing, in a horrifying way, to watch him pivot so quickly. He was willing to discard his mistress and forget his hatred the second he smelled money. She looked at the photos again. Then she looked at the settlement paper he had tried to force her to sign. The one that gave her $50,000 to disappear. A cold clarity washed over her. Mr. Alistair, Elena said, not taking her eyes off Julian. Does the clause say, I have to divorce him to get the money? It says the funds are withheld until the marriage is dissolved due to his infidelity, Alistair corrected. If you stay married, the money goes into a charitable trust for cats. You get nothing. Elena smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. Julian, she said softly. Yes. He leaned forward, hope igniting in his eyes. You want to pause the divorce? You want to try to work it out? I think we owe it to ourselves, Julian said, nodding vigorously. I can forgive the secrets if you can forgive the indiscretion. I see, Elena said. She stood up. She picked up the settlement agreement Julian's lawyer had drafted, the one that gave her nothing. She ripped it in half, then in quarters. She let the pieces flutter to the floor. Mr. Graham, she said to Alistair, I have no intention of staying married to this man for 1 second longer than necessary, but I also have no intention of letting him think he can manipulate me. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to request a recess. Not to reconcile, but to retain proper counsel. I believe I can now afford the best. Objection, Sterling shouted. We had a deal on the table. The deal was rejected, the judge ruled, banging the gavel. Court is in recess for 72 hours. Miss Vance, congratulations on your change of fortune. I suggest you use that time wisely. As the bailiff called, all rise, Julian lunged toward the barrier. "Elena, you can't do this. You need me. You don't know how to handle that kind of world. They'll eat you alive." Elena paused at the door. She looked back at Julian, sweating and desperate, and Chloe looking furious and betrayed. "They might try, Julian," Eleanor said coolly. "But I lived with you for 5 years. I think I've built up an immunity to snakes." She walked out of the courtroom, Alistair falling into step beside her. "That was impressive, my lady," Alistair murmured as they hit the marble hallway of the courthouse. "Don't call me that yet," Elena said, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "And Alistair?" "Yes?" "You said the money is in pounds. How quickly can we access a portion of it?" "We can have a line of credit authorized within the hour. What do you need? A hotel? Security?" Elena stopped walking. She looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there was the Thorn Dynamics headquarters, the building she had helped design. "I need to make a purchase," Elena said. "Julian said his company is going public soon. He owns 51% of the voting shares, doesn't he?" "I believe so," Alistair said, pulling up a file on his tablet. Though he leveraged a significant portion of his personal equity to cover some gambling debts in Macau last spring. He's cash poor, stock rich. And the bank holding that debt? Vanguard Global. Your bank, essentially. Elena's eyes narrowed. "Get me the loan officer on the phone. Julian wants to play games with ownership? Let's show him who actually owns the board." Alistair smiled, a genuine, wicked smile. "I think I'm going to enjoy working for you, Ms. Vance." 72 hours later, the atmosphere inside the headquarters of Thorn Dynamics was electric, but for all the wrong reasons. The glass and steel tower in Midtown Manhattan was buzzing with rumors. The divorce hearing hadn't been public, but whispers travel fast in New York, especially when billionaires are involved. Julian Thorn stood at the head of the long obsidian conference table on the 40th floor. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were poorly concealed with concealer, likely applied by Chloe, who sat silently in the corner, chewing on a fingernail. "The IPO launches in 3 days," Julian barked, slamming his hand on the table. The board of directors, 12 men and women who controlled the fate of the company, flinched. "I don't care about the rumors regarding my personal life. The evaluation stands at $800 million. We are going to ring that bell on Wall Street, and we are going to be rich. Is that understood?" "Julian," spoke up Marcus, heavy, the CFO. "The rumors aren't just about the divorce. There's chatter about a liquidity issue, a block on our credit line from Vanguard Global. If we don't have that credit line to underwrite the IPO insurance, the SEC shuts us down before we even open." Julian wiped sweat from his upper lip. "It's a glitch. I called the bank. They said the account is under administrative review. It'll be cleared by noon." "It won't be cleared," a voice rang out from the double doors. Every head in the room turned. Elena Vance stood in the doorway. But it wasn't the Elena they remembered. The woman who used to bring Julian lunch in Tupperware containers, wearing jeans and oversized sweaters, was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she owned the building. She wore a cream-colored Alexander McQueen power suit that tailored her waist perfectly, paired with Louboutin heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was blown out in sleek, chestnut waves. But the most expensive thing she wore was her expression, utter, terrifying calm. Flanking her was Alistair Graham, looking impeccable in a 3-piece tweed suit, and 2 large security guards who blocked the door. "Security!" Julian roared. "Get her out of here! How did she even get up here?" "Your security team works for the building owner," Alistair said smoothly, stepping forward. "And since the building is part of the Blackwood real estate portfolio, they now work for Miss Vance, or rather, Lady Blackwood," the board members murmured. "Lady Blackwood?" "Elena, get out," Julian hissed, marching toward her. "You think because you found a pot of gold you can crash my board meeting? This is a place of business. Go buy a handbag and leave the adults to talk." Elena didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She walked past him, her perfume, a subtle, expensive jasmine, wafting in his face. She took the empty seat at the opposite end of the table, directly facing Julian's chair. "Sit down, Julian," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight of authority that made him pause. "We need to discuss the glitch with your credit line." You did this?" Julian realized, his face turning purple. "You froze my accounts out of spite?" "Spite is for children," Elena said, opening a leather folder Alistair placed in front of her. "This is business. You see, gentlemen and ladies of the board, Mr. Thorne here has a personal debt of $50 million, gambling debts mostly. Macau, Monaco, Las Vegas." The board members gasped. They began whispering furiously. "Lies!" Julian screamed. "She's lying. She's a bitter ex-wife." "I have the receipts," Elena said, sliding copies of wire transfers down the table. "To cover these losses, Julian leveraged his personal equity in Thorne Dynamics. He put up 30% of his voting shares as collateral to Vanguard Global." She paused, letting the information sink in. "As you know, I recently acquired a controlling interest in the debt division of Vanguard Global, which means I hold the note on his debt. And as of this morning, I have called that debt due immediately." Marcus, the CFO, looked pale. "If the debt is called, and he can't pay, he defaults," Elena finished. "And per the terms of the loan agreement, the collateral, his 30% stake in this company, reverts to the lender. Me." Silence descended on the room. It was absolute. Julian looked like he had been punched in the gut. He staggered back, gripping the back of his chair. You can't do that. That's my company. I built this. You were just the waitress who cleaned my apartment." "And you were the man who mocked me in open court 3 days ago," Elena said coldly. "You told me to go back to the diner. I decided I'd rather come to the boardroom." She stood up and looked at the board. "Here is the situation. Julian Thorne is technically bankrupt. If he remains CEO, I will foreclose on his shares, trigger a hostile takeover, and this IPO will be dead in the water. Your stock options will be worthless." She leaned forward, placing her hands on the table. "However," she continued, "if the board votes to remove him as CEO immediately for gross misconduct and financial negligence, I will convert the debt into equity, inject $50 million of liquid capital into the company, and the IPO proceeds as scheduled on Friday." She smiled at the terrified faces around the table. "The choice is yours. Save the company, or save the man who gambled it away." Julian looked around the table, his eyes wide with panic. "Guys, Marcus, Linda, you can't listen to her. She's crazy. We've been friends for 10 years. Marcus, the CFO, didn't look at Julian. He looked at the financial documents Elena had provided. He looked at the potential $800 million valuation that was about to evaporate. Marcus cleared his throat. "I move for a vote of no confidence in CEO Julian Thorne." "Seconded," Linda, the VP of Operations, said immediately. "You traitors!" Julian screamed. He lunged across the table toward Marcus, but the 2 security guards intercepted him instantly, pinning his arms behind his back. "Let me go! This is my company. I am Thorne Dynamics." Julian thrashed, his perfect suit wrinkling, his face contorted in ugly rage. "All in favor?" Marcus asked. Every hand in the room went up. Even Chloe, standing in the corner, looked like she was considering raising hers. "Motion passed," Marcus said. He looked at Julian. "Julian, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Please vacate the premises." Elena watched calmly as her ex-husband was dragged toward the door. As he passed her, he stopped fighting for a second. He looked into her eyes, and she saw genuine fear there for the first time. "Why?" he whispered. "I loved you once." "No, Julian," Elena said softly, so only he could hear. "You loved that I made you feel big when you were small. But you never loved me. Because the moment you got big, you threw me away." She nodded to the guards. "Get him out." As the doors closed behind a screaming Julian, Elena turned back to the stunned boardroom. She smoothed her jacket. "Now," she said, taking Julian's seat at the head of the table, "let's talk about this IPO." Victory in the boardroom was sweet, but Elena quickly learned that a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. Julian Thorne had lost his company, his office, and his dignity, but he still had one weapon left: his mouth. 2 days after the boardroom coup, Elena was sitting in the library of the Blackwood penthouse on Park Avenue. The place was massive, filled with first-edition books and art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Yet, she felt strangely isolated. "My lady," Alistair said, entering with a tablet. His face was grim. "You need to see this." He handed her the tablet. It was paused on a video from The Daily Truth, a sensationalist tabloid talk show with millions of viewers. Eleanor pressed play. Julian sat on a plush sofa opposite the host. He looked nothing like the arrogant CEO from the courtroom or the raging maniac from the boardroom. He was wearing a soft sweater, looking disheveled and humble. His eyes were red-rimmed. I don't know what happened," Julian was saying to the camera, his voice breaking perfectly. "I built that company from a garage. I worked 18-hour days. And then, my ex-wife, she just changed." "Changed how?" the host asked sympathetically. "She found out she inherited this money," Julian sniffed, wiping a fake tear, "and it corrupted her. She became paranoid. She thought I was after her money. I tried to protect her, to tell her to be careful with these foreign bankers she was dealing with. But she turned on me. She used her money to bribe my board, to steal my life's work. She's not well. I think the shock of the money caused a mental break." Elena felt her blood boil. "He's calling me crazy." "It gets worse," Alistair warned. "She kicked me out on the street," Julian continued on the screen. "I have nothing. I'm sleeping on a friend's couch. And the worst part is, she was having an affair the whole time." Elena gasped. "What?" "Yes," Julian nodded solemnly. "With the very banker who found her money. This Alistair Graham character. I believe they conspired to defraud her uncle's estate and are now using me as a scapegoat." The host gasped dramatically. "So you're saying this is a conspiracy?" "I'm saying I just want my wife back," Julian pleaded, looking directly into the camera. "Elena, if you're watching, stop this. Stop hurting people. Come home. I forgive you." Elena threw the tablet onto the sofa. "He's unbelievable. He's the one who cheated. We have photos." "We do," Alistair said calmly. "But the public doesn't know that. And right now, he is playing the victim of the elite card perfectly. The internet is already turning. Look at the comments." Elena glanced at the scrolling feed. "Justice for Julian Aschancach, Gold Digger Elena, S. Boycott, Thorne Dynamics. He's trying to tank the IPO," Elena realized. "If public sentiment turns against the company because of me, the stock price crashes. He'd rather burn it to the ground than let me run it." "Precisely," Alistair said. "We need to respond. But a simple denial won't work. He has woven a narrative that makes you look like a powerful villain and him the underdog. The intercom buzzed. "Miss Vance," the doorman's voice came through. "There is a woman here to see you, a Miss Chloe Miller. She says it's urgent. She says she has the smoking gun." Elena exchanged a look with Alistair. Chloe, Julian's mistress, the woman who had sneered at her in court. "Let her up," Elena said. 5 minutes later, Chloe walked into the library. She looked terrible. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her mascara was running, and she was carrying a large gym bag. "I want immunity," Chloe said before she even said hello. "And I want $2 million. Cash." "You're in no position to make demands," Alistair said, stepping forward. "Aren't I?" Chloe dropped the gym bag on the floor. It made a heavy, clunking sound. "Julian is staying at my apartment. He's been drinking non-stop since you fired him. He thinks he's winning the PR war. But he's sloppy." Chloe kicked the bag. "That's his laptop and his backup hard drive. He forgot he left them at my place when he went to do that interview." Eleanor looked at the bag, then at Chloe. "Why are you doing this? You love him. You were picking out curtains for my apartment." Chloe laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "Love? I thought he was a billionaire. Yesterday he asked me to pawn my Rolex so he could pay his PR agent. And then—" Chloe touched her cheek. There was a faint bruise there, covered by makeup. "Then he blamed me for the photos you found. He got physical." Elena's expression hardened. She knew Julian's temper. She had walked on eggshells around it for years. "What's on the drive?" Elena asked. "Everything," Chloe whispered. "Not just the affair. The real books, the double accounting. Julian wasn't just gambling his own money. He was skimming from the employee pension fund to cover his tracks. He's been laundering money through a shell company in the Cayman Islands for 2 years." Alistair's eyebrows shot up. "That's federal prison time. That's 20 years minimum." "If you release this," Chloe said, "he doesn't just lose the PR war, he goes to jail. And the fidelity clause? It's rock solid, proving he committed felony embezzlement against the marital assets, voids any claim he has to anything." Elena looked at the bag. It was the end of Julian. Total, complete destruction. "Why bring it to me?" Elena asked. "Why not go to the police yourself?" "Because the police don't pay $2 million, Chloe said bluntly. "And I need to get out of New York before he realizes I took this. He's dangerous, Elena. You know that better than anyone." Elena walked over to the window. She looked out at the city. She had wanted him to pay. She had wanted justice. But this was nuclear. "Alistair," Elena said softly. "Yes, my lady." "Pay her." Alistair nodded. "I will arrange the transfer." "But," Eleanor added, turning to Chloe, "you don't just leave town. You come with me. We're going to do an interview, a live one, and you're going to hand me that hard drive on camera." Chloe paled. "He'll kill me." "He won't be able to touch you," Elena said, her voice turning into steel. "Because by the time we're done, Julian Thorne won't be the underdog anymore. He'll be the most hated man in America." Elena picked up the gym bag. It felt heavy. It felt like the weight of 5 years of lies. "Get the car, Alistair," Elena commanded. "We're going to the television studio. It's time to rewrite the narrative." As they moved to leave, Elena's phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. "Miss me yet? The stock dropped 10% after my interview. Call me. Let's make a deal." Elena typed a reply, her fingers moving swiftly. "Watch the news at 6, ma. I have a surprise for you." She hit send, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door. The victim was gone. The billionaire was here, and she was about to settle the score once and for all. The green room of the Sarah Jenkins show was freezing, kept at a frigid temperature to prevent the heavy studio makeup from melting under the lights. Elena sat on a beige sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Next to her, Chloe was shaking so hard her teeth were practically chattering. "I can't do this," Chloe whispered, clutching the gym bag to her chest like a life preserver. "He'll ruin me. He has videos, Elena. Personal videos. He said he'd leak them if I ever crossed him." Elena turned to the younger woman. In the harsh, fluorescent light, Chloe looked less like the arrogant mistress from the courtroom and more like a terrified child. "He won't leak anything, Chloe," Elena said, her voice steady despite her own racing heart. "Because by the time this hour is up, he won't have access to a phone, let alone the internet. You are the key. You turn the lock." Alistair stood by the door, speaking in low, rapid tones into his cell phone. He hung up and walked over. "It's arranged," Alistair said. "I have contacts at the Southern District of New York Prosecutor's Office. They are watching the broadcast live. If the evidence on that drive is what you say it is, federal agents are already en route to Julian's location." "Where is he?" Elena asked. "The St. Regis Hotel," Alistair replied with a smirk. "Apparently, he decided to treat himself to one last night of luxury on a credit card he stole from his mother." A production assistant poked her head in, wearing a headset. "Miss Vance, we're live in 2 minutes. Sarah is ready for you." Eleanor stood up. She smoothed the skirt of her deep crimson dress, a color she chose deliberately. It was the color of power. It was the color of war. "Let's go," she said. The studio was blindingly bright. The audience applause was polite but hesitant. They had seen Julian's tearful interview earlier that day. They thought Elena was the villain. Sarah Jenkins, the doyenne of prime-time interviews, sat in a high-backed chair. She was known for her shark-like ability to smell blood in the water. She didn't smile as Elena sat down. "Elena," Sarah began, skipping the pleasantries as the red on-AR light flickered to life. "This morning, your ex-husband sat in that very chair and called you a mentally unstable woman who stole his company. He says he is sleeping on a couch while you sit in a penthouse. How do you respond to the allegations that you are abusing your newfound wealth?" Elena looked directly into the camera lens. She imagined Julian watching. "I didn't steal his company, Sarah," Elena said clearly. "I saved it. Julian Thorne didn't lose his company because of a divorce. He lost it because he gambled it away," the audience murmured. "Gambling," Sarah pressed. "Those are serious accusations. Julian claims those are fabricated bank records." "Julian claims a lot of things," Elena said. "He claims he built Thorne Dynamics alone. But I was the one who wrote the original code for his algorithm while he was passed out from drinking. He claims he loves me. But he had a mistress for 18 months. "Hearsay," Sarah challenged. "He admits to an indiscretion, but he says you are blowing it out of proportion to hide your own affair with your financial advisor." Elena smiled. "I anticipated he would say that, which is why I didn't come alone." Elena gestured to the side of the stage. "Please welcome the woman Julian claims doesn't matter, his fiancée, Ms. Chloe Miller." The audience gasped audibly. Sarah Jenkins looked genuinely surprised, a rare feat. Chloe walked out. She looked fragile, her makeup intentionally light to show the bruise on her cheek. She sat next to Eleanor. "Chloe," Sarah said, leaning in. "You're engaged to Julian. Why are you here with his ex-wife?" "Because I was afraid," Chloe said, her voice trembling into the microphone. "I thought he was a genius. But he's a criminal. He hit me yesterday when I asked him about the money." "What money?" Sarah asked. Chloe lifted the gym bag. She pulled out the hard drive. "This is Julian's backup drive," Chloe said. "He kept 2 sets of books. Thorn Dynamics isn't profitable, Sarah. It hasn't been for 3 years. Julian has been draining the employee pension fund to pay for his losses in Macau. There are over 400 families who work for him who have 0 retirement savings right now because he spent it on baccarat and diamonds." The studio went dead silent. This wasn't just celebrity gossip anymore. This was a crime against working people. "We have forensic accountants reviewing this data as we speak," Elena added. "But we found something else. A folder labeled Cayman. It details money laundering operations for an entity listed only as the Syndicate. Julian wasn't just stealing, he was washing dirty money." Sarah Jenkins turned to the camera, her face grave. "If this is true—" "It is true," Elena said. "And to the families of the Thorn Dynamics employees watching this, I promise you, I will use my personal inheritance to replenish every cent Julian stole. No one will lose their pension on my watch." The audience erupted. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was a roar of approval. People stood up. Meanwhile, at the St. Regis Hotel, Julian Thorn was screaming at the television. "She's lying! That little traitor!" He threw a crystal tumbler against the wall, shattering it. He scrambled for his phone. He needed to call his pilot. He needed to get to a non-extradition country immediately. He dialed the number, sweating profusely. "Pick up! Pick up!" Boom, boom, boom! The heavy oak door of the hotel suite shook on its hinges. "FBI, open up!" Julian froze. He dropped the phone. He looked at the window. It was 30 stories down. There was no escape. The door splintered as a battering ram hit it. 6 agents in tactical gear swarmed the room, weapons drawn. "Julian Thorn, get on the ground, now!" Back in the studio, a producer ran onto the stage and whispered in Sarah Jenkins's ear. Sarah's eyes widened. She held up a hand to quiet the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "We have breaking news coming in from our news desk. FBI agents have just raided the St. Regis Hotel. Julian Thorn has been taken into custody on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." Elena let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 5 years. She felt Alistair's hand gently touch her shoulder from behind the sofa. "It's over," he whispered. Elena looked at the monitor, where a live feed showed Julian, handcuffed, being shoved into the back of a black SUV. He looked small, defeated. "Yes," Elena said, tears finally pricking her eyes. "It's over." But as the cameras cut to commercial and the studio dissolved into chaos, Elena didn't notice the man standing at the very back of the audience. He wore a dark grey suit and hadn't clapped once. He was typing a message on a secure phone. "The asset has been compromised. The wife has the drive. Initiate Protocol 0. 3 weeks after Julian's arrest, Elena sat in the newly renovated CEO's office of Vance Innovations. The company stock was soaring, and Julian was rotting in a federal holding cell, denied bail and facing 30 years. It felt like the victory was complete. But as she left the building to meet Alistair, the air felt heavy. When she slid into the back of his town car, Alistair didn't smile. "We have a problem," he said grimly as the car merged into traffic. "My contacts found out who Julian was laundering money for. It wasn't just a shell company. It was the Volkov Bratva." Elena froze. "The Russian mob?" "Julian lost 40 million of their dollars when the FBI froze the accounts," Alistair explained. "Viktor Volkov doesn't care about excuses. He wants his investment back." Before Elena could respond, a black van T-boned their car. Metal screamed, and the world spun. Glass shattered as masked men swarmed the vehicle. Alistair lunged to cover Elena, drawing a concealed pistol, but he was too slow. A gunshot cracked through the rain. Alistair slumped back, blood blossoming on his shoulder. "Alistair!" Elena screamed, as rough hands dragged her out of the wreckage and threw a hood over her head. She woke up tied to a chair in a damp, dimly lit warehouse. A man in an immaculate white suit stepped out of the shadows. He looked like a grandfather, but his eyes were cold, dead chips of ice. "I am Victor Volkov," he said calmly. "Your husband was a fool. You, however, seem capable. You froze my assets. Now, you must replace them." "I don't have the authority to unfreeze FBI evidence," Elena spat, trying to hide her terror. "I don't want the cash," Volkov smirked. "I want the black ledger, the Vance family codes to the underground banking network, unlimited, untraceable movement of funds." He pulled out a phone and showed her a live video feed. It was Alistair, unconscious in a hospital bed. A man in scrubs stood over him with a syringe. "My associate is waiting for my call," Volkov whispered. "Give me the codes and your friend lives. Refuse and they both die." Elena stared at the screen. Julian had been a nuisance. This was a monster. But Volkov made one mistake. He thought threatening her friends would make her weak. Instead, it made her dangerous. "The codes are in London," Elena lied, her voice steel. "We have to go to the vault." The private jet landed on a secluded airstrip outside London under the cover of darkness. Elena, hands bound, was marched by Volkov and his men into a black sedan. Their destination, the Vance estate at Blackwood Manor. Deep beneath the centuries-old library lay the family vault. It required a retinal scan and a voice key to open. Volkov stood behind Elena, his gun pressed cold against her spine. "Open it," he commanded. "Transfer the ledger rights to my account, and I make the call to save your friend." Elena stepped up to the terminal. She felt a strange calm. She remembered the final briefing Alistair had given her about the vault security protocols, specifically the protocol for a hostile takeover. "I need my hands free," she said. Volkov nodded to a guard, who cut the zip ties. Elena massaged her wrists, took a deep breath, and placed her eye against the scanner. "Identity confirmed. Lady Elena Blackwood," the automated voice chimed. "Please enter the master key." Elena's fingers hovered over the keypad. She wasn't just typing a password, she was making a choice. She typed VANCE0000PURGE. The screen flashed red. "What is that?" Volkov shouted, raising the gun. "Why is it red?" "Because," Elena said, turning to face him, "I didn't unlock the ledger. I initiated the purge protocol. It's a distress signal linked directly to MI6 and the Royal Guard. This room is now a sealed cage." Before Volkov could pull the trigger, the heavy steel door slammed shut, locking them both inside. Simultaneously, ventilation shafts hissed, pumping knockout gas into the chamber. "You crazy witch!" Volkov choked, stumbling. He fired a shot wildly, hitting the ceiling, before his knees gave out. Elena, having held her breath, pulled a small emergency oxygen mask from the hidden compartment Alistair had showed her in the blueprints. She watched the powerful mob boss collapse. 10 minutes later, the doors hissed open. Armed MI6 agents stormed the room, securing the unconscious Volkov. "Lady Blackwood?" an agent asked. "We have a team at Weill Cornell Hospital in New York. The assassin has been neutralized. Mr. Graham is safe." Elena exhaled, the adrenaline finally leaving her body. She stepped over Volkov's body and walked out of the vault. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the matriarch of the Vance Empire. 2 weeks later, Elena walked into Alistair's hospital room in New York. He was sitting up, pale but smiling. You purged the ledger, Alistair said, shaking his head. Risky. I calculated the odds. Elena smiled, taking his hand. I learned from the best. So, what now? Alistair asked. Retirement? Elena walked to the window, looking out at the city she now effectively owned. No, Julian and Volkov were just the beginning. There are plenty of sharks in these waters, Alistair. I think it's time they met the Leviathan. What a roller coaster. From a humiliated wife in a divorce court to a billionaire power player taking down the Russian mob, Elena's journey proves that the best revenge isn't just success, it's owning the whole game. She proved that dignity is priceless, but $1 billion legacy certainly helps balance the scales of justice. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, twists, and ultimate redemption, please destroy that like button. It helps the channel so much. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss part 1 of our next saga. What would you have done in the vault? Would you have given Volkov the money? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.